Hey there, this is Anthony Corelli. Just wanted to remind you that we are on hiatus in between season 2 and season 3 of the Freedom from the Struggle podcast. However, we didn't want to leave you without content. So, as with the previous two nights, we're going to offer up another excerpt from my book series entitled The Struggle Series. And this time, we're going to take an excerpt from book 3 entitled The Return. If you're enjoying the stories from the Struggle series, you can listen to that content on a separate podcast entitled, you guessed it, The Struggle Series. That airs every Thursday night at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time, wherever you listen to your podcasts. We hope you're enjoying this bonus content, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. We hope that God brings you peace and blessings throughout this week. See you soon. Chapter 3 Beware of Dog. Tony's senior year of high school came on like a freight train. The summer had been full of fun and adventure. It was now the fall of 1988, and he vowed to make this year one to remember. Crystal had set him up on a few dates, but these fizzled out quickly. Then she set him up with her friend Katherine Johnson. Katherine, or Kitty as she preferred to be called, connected with Tony instantly. They had been inseparable ever since. Tony had a busy schedule with sports, music, school, and now Kitty. He was happy for the first time in a long time. He spent all of his free time with Kitty or on the phone with her. One particular Thursday, he met Kitty after practice. Pueblo County High School sat in between 35th Lane and 36th Lane on Highway 50 East. There was a convenience store right on the corner of 36th Lane. That's where they met. They bought some food, warmed it up, and sat down in the small dining area. They talked and flirted and talked some more. Tony was smitten, to say the least. Kitty was a blonde-haired, green-eyed beauty. She was also intelligent. Tony loved the combination, and she helped to pull him out of his sadness. The conversation soon switched to their weekend plans. Kitty said, "We should do something fun tomorrow night." "What do you have in mind?" "I heard your sister talking about visiting a new haunted site. Why don't we find one?" "Are you sure you want to do that? Besides, I don't know where to go." A couple of old farmers were sitting 2 tables over and were obviously eavesdropping. One of them spoke up and said, "If you're looking to be scared, I know where you should go." Kitty said, "Okay, tell us, as long as it's really scary. If you drive south right here on 36th Lane for a really long time, you'll run into an old bridge. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. That bridge has a history. The rumor is that way back in the past, a woman rode off the bridge on her horse. Some of the old timers out there say that they've seen her riding that horse. Some even say that if you cross the bridge, she and her horse will smash into your vehicle or even jump on the hood of your car." Tony said, "Where is this place? Last year at practice, we ran like 8 miles up 36th Lane. I didn't see a bridge." "No, it's way out there. Probably like 20 miles or so. I'm just saying, there's a lot of rumors. It's way out in the middle of nowhere. That's scary all by itself." Tony thanked the farmer and went back to his conversation. He and Kitty discussed this and decided it was a good idea. Now they had to sell the idea to the gang. Tony went over to the payphone and called Ryan. Ryan answered quickly and agreed to the adventure even quicker. Tony gave Ryan the task of getting Dave involved. Tony then put some more change into the phone and called Joey. Joey and Crystal were together. They said to count them in. Tony could tell that Joey and Crystal were still on shaky ground. He thought that time would help them, but it was obviously not helping them at all. Tony wanted to help them, but the last time he tried, there were punches thrown. Tony hung up the phone and he sat back down. He told Kitty about his suspicions regarding Joey and Crystal. She put her head down and thought really hard before she spoke. Tony, I'm worried about her. She talks to me about it all the time. All they do is fight. She's not happy. I don't know why she stays. He's mean to her. Not all the time, but at least once a week, he just snaps. They're both great people. Maybe they're just not meant to be together. Tony wanted to argue and defend his friend. He could not bring himself to do it. Tony had seen it for himself. He wasn't sure if it was his place to say something. He made up his mind to try and find time to talk to him. In the meantime, they had plans to make. Tony went home to talk with Ray. She seemed to be on board. She picked up the phone and started to call her friends. Over the course of the night, all the girls called back. They were in. They would all meet at Tony and Ray's house at about 30 minutes after 9 that coming Friday. They would make the journey in Tony's mom's van. It was built to seat 8. They would cram in and make room for 10. Friday came and everyone scrambled to make it home on time. Some of them were on the football team. Some were cheerleaders. Once the game ended, they all ran home, showered, and made it just before the scheduled meeting time. They all jumped into the van and headed towards their destination. Tony drove and Kitty sat in the passenger seat. The other 8 passengers crammed in. Ryan and Trish sat in the back cargo hatch, even though there were no seats. The van wasn't as crowded as they thought it would be. They drove up Bronco Drive and turned left onto South Road. As they headed for 36th Lane, Tony told them the story of the woman on the horse. Fortunately, South Road also has a small bridge that will only allow one car at a time to pass. As they crossed over the bridge, the story was already setting in. The girls screamed and discussed how terrifying it would be to see a woman riding a horse. Tony laughed because the story didn't seem that scary when he heard the farmer tell it. Now that it was dark and there were no other cars on the road, it was a little more nerve-wracking. Tony pretended to swerve and yelled, "What was that?" He caused the van to collectively gasp. After they realized he was joking, he was met with boos and a couple of punches to the arm. Soon the van was full of conversations about Swallow Cemetery and the Honor Farm. The girls felt the need to catch Kitty up on the previous adventures. They took turns giving details to make sure she had the details from every angle. Tony found it interesting to hear the different versions. All he could remember were the demons that he had seen on these trips. The stories, plus the reality of the previous outings, made him wonder why he would continue to participate in this behavior. He could sense the real danger, but as teenagers do, he ignored it. Later in life, he would second guess moments like this. Now, he was smitten with Kitty Johnson, and he would do anything to spend time with her. He blocked all reason out of his mind and turned on the showmanship. Soon the van turned right onto 36th Lane and headed toward the mysterious bridge. The vehicle drove for miles and miles. The farther out they drove, the fewer and farther between were the houses. Dave was full of ghost stories, so we started telling them one after the other. This created a very tense atmosphere. Normally, this would do well on a night like this. On this night, however, this would only amplify the terror they were about to experience. Before they knew it, they were several miles from nowhere. This was a dark night with no moon in sight. Tony drove with the bright lights switched on since there were no other cars in sight. The bright headlights shined on a mailbox with a reflector on the side of it. Below the mailbox sat an exceptionally large white husky dog. As they passed by, the dog sat still, only bothering to turn its head. Ryan commented, "That was the first house we've seen in a very long time." Joey and Crystal were whispering in the back. Tony looked in the rearview mirror when he heard the whispering. He was worried that they may start fighting again. They were in the middle of nowhere, and an argument in a crowded van would not be good. The conversation in the van quieted as everyone was trying to focus on what was being whispered. Tony turned to Kitty to see if she could hear what was being said. As he turned to look at her, he saw the van was approaching another house on the right. He saw a large mailbox, and beneath the mailbox was a white dog. Crystal stopped whispering and screamed, "I told you! There's something weird about that dog. There it is again. Do you think it's a coincidence that we've seen that dog twice now? Didn't you see the way it looked at us? Dogs don't move like that." Joey said, "Crystal, I know you're scared, but we're out here to see a ghost lady on a horse. Your mind is just playing tricks on you. They're just dogs. What can a dog do? A dog cannot run as fast as a car." Crystal took a deep breath and tried to calm down. She was disturbed deep down in her soul. She sensed something was very wrong. Tony was starting to feel the same way. Tony had a gift that allowed him to feel and understand the feelings of others. Tony was unsure if he was just feeling Crystal's fears or if he was actually sensing that something was wrong. Heather was talking to Crystal, trying to distract her from her obvious anxiety. The distraction was short-lived. The van approached the next mailbox. Because of the profound darkness, every mailbox had reflectors to ensure a driver didn't drift over and hit one of these reinforced structures. This particular mailbox was made of brick. Next to the mailbox was an identical white dog. Kitty let out a scream that prompted the other girls to do the same. As they passed the dog, Tony took the time to carefully watch the dog and its mannerisms. Tony had to admit the dog moved unnaturally. It was as if the body of the dog was stationary and the head moved with too wide of a range of motion. Tony and Ray had once had a husky and never knew the breed to move like this one. Tony looked in the mirror to see the expressions on their faces. It was too dark to see, so he turned on the dome light. Everyone in the van was serious. Tony felt compelled to ease their discomfort. He said, "Listen, I think it's very likely that these farmers all have dogs from the same litter. I don't know if we're freaking out for nothing, but the dogs are just sitting there, so I don't think there's anything to worry about." Heather said, "I don't know, but most dogs I know will chase a car. Doesn't it freak you out that they don't chase the car?" Dave said, "I know it sounds stupid, but I think we should consider the fact that we're out in the middle of nowhere. If something happens, who will ever know?" Joey said, "You're ridiculous. We came out here to be scared, and now everyone is too afraid to keep going? What if we did see a ghost lady on a horse? You all would just pee your pants." Trish said, "You don't have to be a jerk, Joey. Not everyone is a cold-blooded jerk like you. That's 3 white dogs in a row. Something's not right." Tony knew that Joey was on edge, so he intervened. He said, "Look up there to the left. There's a mailbox. See? No white dog. We're all scared, and our minds are racing." Kelly said, "I vote that if we see one more white dog, we turn around." Crystal said, "So do I." Joey gave her a look that was anything but loving. Tony turned the dome light off, hoping that nobody else saw Joey's hateful glare. The darkness with no dome light shocked them all for a second. Then they realized it helped them to see clearly outside of the car. Then Ryan sent a chill up their spines. He said, "I vote that we turn around if we see another dog, but you do know what that means. That means that we have to pass those dogs on the way back." Everyone knew that what he was saying was worth considering. It also showed that there was no real alternative. Even if they reached the bridge, they would still have to turn around and head home. If there was an alternative route, none of them knew it. They were in foreign territory. This was the time before smartphones and GPS. They were out in the middle of nowhere and they only knew one way home. Tony said, "Well, let's take a vote. What do you want to do?" The van was quiet as everyone considered their next move. Unfortunately, the decision was about to be made for them. They approached another residence on the right. As they approached the reflector-covered mailbox, they saw it. Another white husky dog. The scream in the car was loud and in unison. They had discussed their decision just a few minutes earlier. Seeing another white dog prompted Tony to drive past the house, do a U-turn, and start heading toward South Road. Tony drove slowly past the house that was now on his left. The dog did not move, except for turning its head to watch the van drive by. Tony was unsure if this was all in his imagination, but he felt like the dog was making eye contact with him specifically. He didn't have much time to consider his thoughts because he was loudly prompted by all to speed up. Tony stepped on the gas, and in no time at all, he was driving about 70 miles per hour and speeding up. The group collectively screamed and shouted commands at Tony. Tony did not need to be told to drive faster. He was already driving well over the 55-mile-per-hour speed limit. They were worried about the dog, but the chaos may be what killed them. The entire group was focused on the left side of the van. They were nervously waiting to reach the next house where they had seen the dog. Because they were all focused on the left side of the van, Tony almost missed the house on the right. At the last minute, he turned and saw the white husky dog sitting by the mailbox. He could not form words. He shouted, "Look, look, look!" Dave said, "Where?" Tony pointed out the right window. The entire group turned to the right to look out the windows. That's when they saw it. This was the point where they realized that their fears were not irrational. Their suspicions about the old white dog were confirmed. Just outside the vehicle, running on its hind legs, was the white dog. Its piercing red eyes were leering into the van. A dog is not capable of running 70 miles per hour. This dog was doing it on its hind legs. In other words, this was not a dog at all. It was a demon. Tony did the only thing his instincts could force him to do. He pushed the gas pedal down all the way to the floor. Soon, they were approaching 100 miles per hour. The dog continued to keep its pace. Suddenly, it reached out and scratched the van with its claws. The screaming in the van was piercing. Tony felt the need to protect his sister and friends. He didn't know what to do. It was obvious that the dog wanted to get in the car. They were not safe. Tony thought he should act, or the demon would eventually get in. He reacted and turned the vehicle into the dog. The van struck the dog, sending it tumbling on the road. Tony felt a brief moment of relief watching the dog tumble in the rearview mirror. As he watched the mirror, he watched his small reprieve disappear. The demon dog jumped back to its feet and ran toward the van. This time, the demon ran on the driver's side of the van and stared at Tony. It reached out to scratch the driver's door. Tony had a thought that came from somewhere in his spirit. He realized that if the demon wanted them dead, they would be dead. This was a game the demon was playing to strike fear. Tony had an overwhelming feeling welling up inside of him. The words formed on his tongue. He shouted, "Jesus, please help us!" The demon leaned towards the car, but seemed like it could not break an invisible barrier. Tony again felt words coming from deep inside of him. He screamed, "Demon, leave us now in the name of Jesus!" Just like that, the demon dog crouched down on all fours and stopped chasing the car. In what seemed like only a few minutes, the van approached South Road. David said, Something's not right. We drove for a long time once we turned off of South Road. It only took like 4 or 5 minutes to get back. That's impossible. Tony looked at the clock on the dashboard. He had remembered looking at the clock right when they were having conversations about turning around. Dave was right. Even at 100 miles per hour, the math did not add up. Something supernatural had occurred. They should have put more thought into this anomaly, but their near death experience had them focused on the demon that would haunt their nightmares for years to come. The van sat silent as they headed back to Bronco Drive. Everyone wanted to speak, but no one knew what to say. There was no mistaking what had happened. There was no logical explanation for what they had seen. All 10 witnesses saw a white husky dog with red eyes running on its hind legs next to a van that was traveling more than 90 miles per hour. This was not an optical illusion or a mass hallucination. It was real. When they pulled into the driveway, they filed out of the van. They sat on the porch and stared into the darkness. Finally, Tony said, "Do you know what's crazy? We all know that happened, and no one will ever believe us. We should just keep it to ourselves." Dave said, "I don't know about you guys, but I'm never going out to haunted places again. We could have died." Crystal said, "It looks like Tony saved us with his prayer. If I go again, I'll make sure Tony is around to save us." Joey said, "I'm sick of you making him out to be a hero. If you like him so much, why don't you hook up with him?" He stormed off to his truck with Crystal chasing behind him. Tony thought about going after him, but it was futile. Whatever was going on with Joey was getting too difficult to tolerate. Tony made up his mind in that moment. His friendship with Joey was over. Besides, he had bigger fish to fry. His mother was going to kill him for damaging her van. This was going to cost him severely. Over the next few months, Tony had grown distant from Kitty. He really liked her, but she was close friends with Crystal. On a couple of occasions, he had caught her in lies. She was spending time with Crystal and Joey, but she was hiding it from Tony. Tony should have broken it off, but she kept promising to be more honest. She lied about that as well. Tony continued to study more about demons and demonic attacks. His studies should have been more fervent considering all he had been through. He studied when he found the time. His family was experiencing increased activity, and Tony realized it was getting dangerous. His family was ignoring the increased activity, and Tony could no longer pretend it was going to be okay. This was coming to a head. Tony had been haunted by a demon since he was a small child. This demon had followed the family from their former house on Jackson Street to the house on Bronco Drive. As Tony had gotten older, the attacks had become less focused on him and more focused on the family in general. These demonic interactions usually happened once in a month on average. Lately, it was closer to twice a week. Tony had become a born-again Christian several months back, which seemed to have angered the demon. He had begun to read his Bible and had heard sermons preached on the demonic on a few occasions. He also learned some from a friend at church who was knowledgeable on the subject. As he learned more about demons, the threats from them seemed to focus on his family. This gave Tony a small reprieve on a personal level. Of course, his family was taking the blunt. On one particular night, Tony and Ray were home alone. Their brother David was staying with a friend. Tony and Ray were both getting ready to go out. Tony had plans with Ryan and Dave. Ray was to head to a party with Heather. Tony's friends showed up early and were itching to go to the bonfire. Tony intended to stay home until Heather and her boyfriend picked up Ray and headed out. Ryan and Dave hounded Tony until he agreed to leave early. Tony was aware that Ray was afraid to be home by herself. He caved to the peer pressure. He caught Ray at the entrance to the basement and said, "Hey, we're going to take off early. What time are you going to be home?" Ray said, "Can't you just wait for like 15 more minutes? Heather and her boyfriend are almost here. You'll be okay. What time you going to be home? Probably midnight. Heather's curfew is midnight. She can't spend the night here anymore since her parents found out that we were staying out late. Tony felt responsible for taking them out to look for ghosts. He should have known better. He also knew that he had not forced anyone to go. Tony knew he should also be home by midnight so that Ray would not have to be home alone. He would go out and have some fun, but be home by midnight. Ray went to the basement to get her clothes out of the dryer. Dave and Ryan went out the front door. The basement was only partially finished and had a creepy vibe. Ray turned on the light that lit up both the basement family room and the laundry room. She opened the dryer, grabbed her clothes, and headed back toward the stairs. That is when she heard the voice. It was a clear voice. There was no doubt that someone or something had spoken to her. The voice said one word. The voice was not as scary in and of itself. It was the fact that the disembodied voice called out to her from the dark section of the basement. The voice said, "Ray." She knew there was no one home. She knew that it was not Tony calling from upstairs. She ran up the stairs and looked out the window. Tony and his friends were driving away in Tony's new four-wheel drive. She was not dressed to go outside in the snow. She wasn't even wearing shoes. That did not stop her from running down the driveway. Tony saw his baby sister chasing down the vehicle with a look of terror on her face. He knew something was wrong, but he was not in the mood to deal with the demonic on this night. Instead of having empathy for his sister, he took out his frustration on her. He mocked her for hearing voices, alluding to the fact that she might be crazy. Ray was not crazy, and he knew it. He had seen and heard demons his whole life. He had protected his sister from these sinister beings since he was born. On this night, he was selfish. He did the unthinkable. He drove away, leaving her to fend for herself. Ray felt defeated. How could her brother just drive away? She wanted to be angry, but she was too scared to worry about him. She walked back into the house and got ready as fast as she could. She went out to the porch and waited for Heather and her boyfriend. When they arrived, she told her friends about her experience. Heather's boyfriend walked back into the house to turn off the lights. Heather suggested that Ray spend the night at her house. Ray quickly accepted. They locked the door and went out to Heather's boyfriend's car. As they backed out of the driveway, he took extra care not to back into the two cars that belonged to Ryan and Dave. He backed out onto the street, then turned to head towards the party. He took one last look at the house. He was sure he saw someone looking out the front window. He decided to say nothing. Tony, on the other hand, had a wave of conscience. He was angry at himself. How could he do this to his sister? What was happening to him? How could he have been so callous? No matter how hard he tried to forget what he did, he could not. He finally went to Ryan and Dave and told them he was going home. Of course, they were not ready to leave, therefore, they were not happy. He told them they would go back to his house, he would take them to their vehicles, and they could head back out. Frustrated, they agreed and jumped into Tony's new vehicle. He easily drove through the snow and got them back quickly to their vehicles. They barely said a word as they headed back to the bonfire. Tony went in the house and started turning lights on. He was relieved that Ray had decided to stay with Heather. He wasn't upset that he had ended his night too soon. He was angry at himself and was not in the mood to be out. He needed to be alone to think. He made a snack and went into the family room. He turned on the television and started watching music videos. After watching several videos, he saw a strange commercial come on the screen. It was a red telephone on a small perch. The phone was surrounded by flames as if the room was on fire. Then the telephone began to ring. Tony was mesmerized by the commercial because it did not seem normal. Then the announcer's voice said, Answer the phone, Tony. Right at that moment, the actual telephone began to ring. He was reluctant to answer. He was in shock. Had he heard the announcer say his name, or had he just misunderstood? He summoned up the courage to walk into the kitchen and answer the phone. He wished that he hadn't. It was a demon. For the next few minutes, chaos broke out in the house. There were bangs, crashes, and disembodied voices. Tony had learned to pray away demons, but he had not seen such an obvious display of power. Still, he knew that prayer was the only thing that would save him. He prayed, and the chaos ceased. Before the demon left, it made a threat to harm his family. Tony had mixed feelings about the attack. On one hand, he had prayed the demon away. That gave him confidence. On the other hand, he knew the threat was real. That scared him. He went to bed that night with a lot on his mind. Somehow, he knew this would soon come to a head.